Secret tunnel just discovered right here in Arizona, right near the border. Agents say it extends about 30 feet into the U.S. near Nogales.
The tunnel, the length of 6 football fields and 6 stories below ground, has rail tracks, ventilation, and electricity.
Mexican officials found the entrance to the tunnel, which they say is about 80 feet long, but isn't yet complete.
For decades, the sun-beaten stretch of land between San Luis Rio Colorado, Mexico, and San Luis, Arizona, seemed an unlikely place to host one of the most technically advanced underground passages ever uncovered in the continental United States. And yet, on late July day, Homeland Security Investigations, also known as HSI, agents discovered what they would go on to describe as the most sophisticated tunnel in U.S. history.
6 people are under arrest tonight after U.S. authorities discovered a drug tunnel between San Diego and Tijuana.
What exactly did they find in these tunnels? And how did their discovery impact the country? Stick around, because what we're about to reveal is sure to blow your mind. The secret tunnel on the Arizona-Mexico border. Strangely enough, the discovery of the Arizona-Mexico tunnel started with a sinkhole, spotted not far from the border wall, sunken slightly in the sandy crust of Yuma County. The indentation could have been dismissed as natural erosion, a quirk of the desert's shifting ground. But the report triggered alarm bells in the mind of Assistant Special Agent Angel Ortiz, whose division had already received unconfirmed and unsettling murmurs of subterranean activity. Immediately, Ortiz sprung into action. He ordered an exploratory drill, and 25 feet down, a camera broke through dirt and blackness and entered another world. What the agents saw was a structure that looked as though it belonged beneath a nuclear facility or a military compound. The tunnel was incomplete. Its northward dig stopped short of breaching the surface on the Arizona side, but its ambition and design were unmistakable. Though it measured only 3 feet wide and 4 feet high, what it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in intricacy. Electrical wiring ran cleanly along reinforced walls. Ventilation ducts spiraled toward the surface like mechanical lungs. Water lines suggested an intent to support not just movement, but occupancy. The tunnel was even fitted with its own rail system, a single narrow track, likely intended for carts or sleds capable of ferrying cargo. Carl E. Landrum, acting chief patrol agent for the Yuma sector, said that the tunnel appears to be the most sophisticated tunnel in U.S. history. In his long career overseeing the tenuous stretch of land between 2 nations, he had never seen anything like it. No one, not Customs and Border Protection, not even the Border Patrol, had known it was there. Unlike previous tunnels discovered in Arizona, including the infamous 2018 structure leading from a house in Mexico to an abandoned Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant in San Luis, this tunnel had no obvious criminal fingerprint.
Homeland Security Investigators discovered a tunnel that stretches from a closed-down Kentucky Fried Chicken in Arizona to a home in Mexico.
That earlier passage had been tied to a man named Ivan Lopez, who was arrested with truckloads of narcotics and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. His tunnel, wide enough to walk through, had been used to funnel heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the U.S. Its purpose was clear: drug smuggling. It was crude, but effective. This tunnel was different. For one, it wasn't done. Its endpoint had not yet breached the U.S. surface. This meant that the builders, whoever they were, had not yet activated the tunnel's true function. Investigators struggled to determine how long it had been under construction. No tools were left behind. No identifying machinery, no digital blueprint. If it had been dug by hand, as Ortiz suggested, it would have taken months, grueling, back-breaking labor, performed beneath unforgiving sand. But there were signs that heavier equipment might have been used, at least to start. The tunnel's precision, its near-flawless angles and even surfaces suggested the aid of something more than shovel and willpower. San Luis, Arizona, a city of barely 35,000 people, straddles the line between bustling commerce and dusty periphery. For those who live there, the border is part of daily life and a tether to history and culture. Few would suspect that under their neighborhoods someone was carving a secret artery through the bedrock of sovereignty. The tunnel's origin was traced back to a modest area in San Luis Río Colorado, Mexico, an unremarkable neighborhood that had more cinderblock homes and rusted fences than by anything sinister. But here, under the patchy yards and faded alleyways, someone had begun to bore through the earth with monastic discipline. The first few meters would have been hardest, the soil most unstable. Yuma's terrain is not friendly to such endeavors. As Ortiz explained, the sand was very loose and most tunnels ended up caving. Yet this one had not. It had been reinforced, buttressed, planned for survival. In time, its design revealed further layers of intricacy. Engineers brought in by HSI noted the quality of construction. Walls that were paneled, not merely shored up with wood or sheet metal. Ceilings reinforced with poured concrete in some sections, lighting installed in recessed grooves, likely to prevent equipment snagging. Water pipes were embedded in the floor, and the tunnel seemed less like a passage and more like a living system or a command center. By the time news of the discovery reached public ears, the tone had already shifted from surprise to alarm. A tunnel of this nature wasn't simply about moving narcotics or undocumented migrants. It hinted at a strategic vision, one that included longevity, utility, and stealth. The rail system, which was probably the most stunning feature, didn't run on rusted tracks or salvaged wheels. It had been embedded directly into the tunnel floor, suggesting that it was meant to handle huge weight. The track ended abruptly near the tunnel's midpoint, as though the builders had paused to reassess or prepare. Things don't end there. It wasn't just the size or finish that rattled investigators. It was the intention. There was no graffiti, no rushed construction. No tunnel like this had ever been found in Yuma. Certainly not one this advanced in such an inhospitable terrain. The possibilities stirred grim speculation. Had it been completed, would the tunnel have served as a conduit for narcotics, like its predecessors? Maybe, but others inside HSI considered alternative uses, including weapons trafficking, covert movement of persons of interest, technology smuggling, as even espionage. The discovery forced intelligence agencies to look backward as well as forward. How many others had been dug and gone undetected? How long had this one been underway before a sinkhole exposed its spine? Were there other partial digs in the region, halted due to cost, risk, or changing strategy? HSI continued to excavate the site, documenting every inch of its serpentine form. At 25 feet underground, the tunnel had already begun to press into more stable soil, far enough below to avoid satellite thermal detection, but close enough to make rapid deployment plausible. The deeper a tunnel, the harder it is to ventilate and navigate. But this one had overcome that challenge, installing airflow systems and wiring that would allow for extended use. The question that hovered above the dig site, however, was simple and unsatisfying. Why stop? The tunnel, had it extended just a few more yards, would have surfaced in a quiet zone of San Luis, Arizona, which was likely in a location already selected, prepared, and watched. Its endpoint was too abrupt, too recent, to suggest abandonment. More likely, it had been paused or interrupted. Whether the sinkhole had collapsed prematurely, drawing attention, or whether the builders had gotten wind of law enforcement probing the area, no one could say. But the discovery arrived just in time. Had it gone unnoticed another week, another month, it's possible the tunnel would have been completed and its purpose, whatever it was, realized. To make sure that never happened, the tunnel was shut down. But what implications did this shutdown have? Keep watching to find out. The implications of the tunnel being shut down. The closure of the sophisticated underground tunnel caused quite a number of geopolitical, economic, and socio-cultural issues. The discovery and abrupt shutdown of this subterranean tunnel upended not only regional dynamics, but also national security doctrine and hemispheric relations, dragging to the surface questions many were not prepared to answer. Few imagined that such a construction would mirror Cold War escape tunnels under the Berlin Wall, except exponentially more advanced. Analysts quickly drew comparisons to Operation Gold, which happened between 1954 to 1956, and Tunnel 57 in 1964. But even those feats of engineering pale beside the tunnel unearthed near Nogales. Unlike its historical cousins, this tunnel wasn't driven by ideological warfare or desperation. It was driven by profit, power, and a staggering audacity. The sudden closure, abrupt, unannounced, and militarized, triggered what local officials are calling a geographic arrhythmia. For decades, border communities in Arizona functioned not just as barriers between nations, but as hybridized ecosystems of trade, culture, and routine human interaction. Towns like Douglas, Naco, and Sasabe, once stitched together by kinship lines and informal economies, now find themselves bisected, not merely in body, but in spirit. The tunnel, for all its illegality, had become a hidden circulatory system. It was how food got cheaper, how undocumented laborers quietly crossed over to tend to summer harvests, how fentanyl made its nightmarish journey east. Its closure is less an act of law enforcement than a violent correction in the bloodstream of the border. The economic ramifications were immediate and not evenly distributed. Within a few hours of the shutdown, interstate trucking delays spiked, especially for routes reliant on perishable goods from Mexican agribusinesses. Inspectors, who were already underpaid and overstretched, were now asked to process triple the volume without the pressure valve the tunnel once illicitly provided. Meanwhile, the price of fresh tomatoes surged, and yet local grocers weren't the only ones reeling. Pharmaceutical supply chains, particularly those involving black market precursors, had to reroute through more dangerous, slower Pacific Coast lanes. It is impossible to discuss implications without addressing who might have been behind it. The complexity of the tunnel suggests not a cartel, but a conglomerate. This was not a project funded on the back of cocaine proceeds and extortion rackets. Instead, investigators point toward a marriage of criminal and paramilitary capital, maybe even state sponsorship. If this is true, then the tunnel's closure is not a win, it is an interruption, and interruptions have consequences. Politically, the shutdown places enormous pressure on local and federal administrations alike. Federal forces arrived in unmarked SUVs, drones buzzed overhead, roads were blocked without explanation. Some ranchers along the border, long skeptical of federal overreach, began openly discussing armed resistance. The sudden absence of the tunnel didn't just remove a route, it removed a sense of control. And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Diplomatically, relations between the US and Mexico have become strained, if not yet openly hostile. But what about the people? Well, among migrants, the closure has created a brutal recalibration. Families, often fleeing Guatemala's narco-politics or El Salvador's climate-ravaged interiors, would have potentially used the tunnels as an escape route. Now, with that subterranean corridor sealed, many are forced back into the desert, into the domain of vultures and dehydration and betrayal. Yet beyond the noise, beyond the sirens and speculation, lies a quieter, more sobering implication. We have underestimated the sophistication of non-state actors. We have assumed, arrogantly, that only governments can build such things. That precision, scale, and patience belong solely to sanctioned institutions. The tunnel tells us otherwise. It whispers of long-term planning, of three-dimensional mapping software smuggled out of Shenzhen, of bribed urban planners in Hermosillo, of blueprints stored in encrypted drives traded in darknet forums. It also tells us that modern borders are conceptual lies, that even in recent years, with walls and drones and heat sensors and biometric gates, those who wish to move, whether for freedom, profit, or power, will find a way. There are whispers that more tunnels may exist, and that this was not a singular artery, but one vessel in a yet undiscovered circulatory system. And if that is true, then the implications of this closure may remain for years, not months. But there are certain measures the United States government is taking to make sure this doesn't happen again. Stay tuned to learn what these measures are. The U.S. countermeasures to prevent future tunnels, like the Arizona-Mexico passage. After the discovery and eventual shutdown of the Arizona-Mexico tunnel, federal authorities in the United States wasted no time in confronting a question that had quietly haunted border security efforts for decades. How many more of these tunnels could exist? And more urgently, how do you stop the next one from being built? As news of the tunnel spread, its complexity, its near-perfect engineering, its chilling precision, there was an undeniable change in tone from the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and even the Department of Defense. This was an underground breach of sovereignty, and it demanded a response that was equal parts technological, tactical, and psychological. The United States began almost immediately to take aggressive action, though not all of it was visible to the public. One of the first steps taken involved the strategic expansion of tunnel detection teams along the border, particularly in tunnel-prone areas such as Nogales, San Diego, and El Paso. The Tunnel Detection and Technology Program, also known as TDTP, which had existed quietly since 2007, received an increase in funding and personnel. The reasoning was simple but sharp. Traditional fences and surveillance could stop what was visible, but tunnels? Tunnels could take months, sometimes years to detect. Some weren't found until after they had been abandoned, or worse, when they'd already served their purpose. To keep up, the U.S. turned to ground-penetrating radar systems, soil resistivity sensors, and seismic acoustic monitoring arrays, deploying them in overlapping grids along high-risk zones. These weren't your average field tools. They were advanced machines, often used in oil exploration or archaeological digs, now being repurposed for border defense. Seismic sensors, in particular, became a favorite. By detecting the subtle vibrations created by digging or machinery underground, they gave authorities the ability to listen for tunnels in real time. When paired with artificial intelligence systems trained to distinguish between natural seismic noise and human activity, these sensors allowed for faster and more accurate alerts. But as expected, this approach came with a lot of challenges. In places like the Sonoran Desert, where animal movement and natural seismic shifts are frequent, the system needed constant calibration and expert interpretation. The government invested in hiring trained geologists and data scientists to monitor these systems around the clock. Simultaneously, the United States began to harden its border from below. Customs and Border Protection have partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers to reinforce key sections of the U.S.-Mexico border with subterranean barriers. These were not literal walls underground. No one was pouring concrete into the soil blindly, but rather steel and mesh anti-tunnel panels buried deep into the earth, designed to deter or at least slow the construction of a tunnel. These underground barriers were expensive, sometimes controversial, but highly effective in known tunnel corridors, areas where geology, location, and history made tunnels more likely. In Nogales, Arizona, a city that has seen over 120 tunnel attempts since the 1990s, these underground reinforcements became the new normal. Beyond physical deterrence, the U.S. government leaned heavily into intelligence gathering. Human intelligence, or HUMINT, became essential. Federal agents began working more closely with local law enforcement and Mexican authorities, particularly in border towns where cartel influence was suspected. Confidential informants, wiretaps, and sting operations were revived with new urgency. After the Arizona tunnel was discovered to have been in construction for nearly 11 months without detection, internal pressure mounted to ensure that no similar operation would go unnoticed again. A joint U.S.-Mexico task force on subterranean threats was established in combining resources from both sides of the border. The task force was granted access to drone surveillance, phone data, and cross-border financial tracking tools. The goal was to identify tunnel funding, movement of heavy equipment, and unusual construction near the border before the first shovel ever hit the dirt. Equally important in the fight against future tunnels was the shift in legal strategy. Recently, the Department of Justice updated the federal criminal code to include expanded definitions of tunnel-related crimes. Now, not only were tunnel diggers and smugglers culpable, but also property owners who knowingly leased land or buildings under which tunnels were constructed. Contractors, engineers, and logistics coordinators could now be prosecuted as co-conspirators, even if they never crossed the border themselves. This broadened legal net gave prosecutors the teeth they needed to pursue organized networks rather than just foot soldiers. Technology continued to evolve rapidly alongside policy. One of the most intriguing developments came from a collaboration between CBP and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, also known as DARPA. DARPA has begun testing autonomous tunnel drones, small robotic units designed to enter narrow underground spaces and scan for human activity, wiring, air ventilation systems, and acoustic signatures. These drones could be deployed through maintenance hatches, old sewage systems, or ventilation pipes, turning dead ends into intelligence assets. Meanwhile, the political climate around tunnel prevention continued to intensify. Border tunnel awareness campaigns were launched in schools and communities near the border. Residents were encouraged to report strange vibrations, construction noises at odd hours, or any signs of sinkholes or new drainage systems that didn't make sense. The logic was clear. The earlier a tunnel was discovered, the easier it was to neutralize. Posters were distributed, hotlines were expanded, and in towns like Douglas, Arizona, local citizens even formed neighborhood watch programs specifically for underground threats. In this strange new frontier, the border wasn't just about fences or gates. It was about depth, secrecy, and a kind of vigilance that had to come from both above and below. Things don't end there. Border states themselves became more involved too. Arizona passed a state-level funding bill to create its own subterranean task force that would work independently but in communication with federal agencies. California, meanwhile, focused more on commercial properties and ports of entry, ensuring that any underground space within a mile of the border was properly registered, inspected, and sealed off when not in use. Despite all these efforts, one truth remained: the tunnel problem would never fully go away. It was an arms race, a duel of creativity between those who build in the shadows and those who shine light into them. But the United States, especially in the wake of the Arizona tunnel, had signaled clearly that it would no longer tolerate the illusion of solid ground. Well, what do you think about these tunnels? Let us know in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.